course, on ProBox TV, post Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano, coming at you from Fresno, California. Big show tomorrow night on ProBox TV. Don't forget to check it out. Outstanding card. But that's why we're in hotel rooms right now. But good news is we're on the West Coast, so we get a little more sleep. Jimmy Smith, as always, alongside the champs, Chris Algieri and Paulie Malignaggi. We're on our hotel rooms, separate hotel rooms here in Fresno. Guys, familiarity breeds contempt, right? But it also breeds respect. After 20 rounds together, Amanda Serrano, Katie Taylor, starting out respectful of one another, a bit more of a boxing match, very, very high level, but not the war a lot of people expected for the third fight. Chris, this one started out a bit tactical, heated up a little bit, but more of a boxing match this time around.
Yeah, you could tell both ladies wanted to be more tactical. They kept saying on the telecast they want to fight smarter, not harder, because really they can't fight any harder than they have in the last two bouts they've had. Those 20 rounds they spent were hellacious. So this fight was much more of a tactical boxing match, which plays to Katie's favor. Obviously getting the decision, but yeah, definitely a different fight than the other two, but much more tactical from both ladies.
Yeah, guys.
Yeah.
I thought maybe they were sort of a little bit spent from the first two fights. Two fights that were very physical, very, very tough on them, very entertaining. But I thought this fight was more tactical. I dare to say it was almost like, yeah, they wanted to win, obviously, but it's almost like they were trying to get out of it without taking so much damage like they did in the first two fights. I know Netflix was trying their balls off to try to sell it like it was a super fight, but like it was some kind of a super exciting fight. It was not. It was a solid fight with a good tactical boxing, which of course I respect. I don't know who's in the background there in the Zoom, but like I'm trying to gather my thoughts here again. But I think that overall those are my thoughts, and I think they maybe didn't want to push the envelope as much tonight, and they went the tactical route, which I can respect. Look, I like tactical boxing. I personally don't mind it, but I'm saying from the point of view of the casual fan, and from the point of view of the rest of the world, because they were, this was a very crossover kind of fight. This was the fight where like a lot of non-boxing fans were even tuning in because of the respect that they've garnered over the first two fights. This didn't live up to the fighting style in that way, but I almost don't blame them. And like I said, as a boxing fan, I don't mind it. But like the champ said a few seconds ago, this will give it a little bit of an advantage to Taylor because, she's more of the technical boxer. I thought Serrano actually adjusted her feet well tonight. I thought Serrano did have better footwork and cut off the ring better. But in spots, like in the 10th round, she totally forgot how to cut off the ring and gave away the 10th round. Looking at the scorecards, it ultimately didn't matter because the scorecards were 7-3. But good adjustments from Serrano. She needed to be technical with a little bit more aggression, I felt. Taylor, I thought, was just trying to box her way through. So I think Taylor was more thankful that Serrano wasn't pressuring as much.
Chris, a big fight, back from our day that had a rematch, of course, was Diego Chico Corrales and Jose Luis Castillo. And I remember when they had a rematch of that fight, and they asked the Bob father, right? They asked, do you think the fight is going to look like the first fight? And I remember him saying, anyone who wants the first fight is a sadist. You can't do that again. I mean, we're going to be carrying both guys out in a body bag if we have the same fight again. That idea that people don't understand is like when one fight is brutal and crazy, the next fight, a lot of times, the third fight in the trilogy, of course, just can't live up to that. People can't physically do that. Was that on display to you tonight, Chris?
Possibly. I mean, a lot of times when fighters, you mentioned that great example, those guys, neither one of them were the same after that fight, and not against each other, not against other people. So it could be the point where those first two fights were so physically demanding and taxing that they're not the same fighters. They are a little bit over the hill. They are a little bit used up. I forgot who said it, but I think it was like Sugar Ray Leonard or something. Every time you step in the ring, you leave a piece of you still in there. And I think these ladies left a lot of themselves in those first two fights and their long careers. They both have very long careers with a lot of fights. Katie Taylor obviously has the super wide amateur background, Olympic gold medalist. And Amanda Serrano, she's got a ton of fights. What she's got like 30, 40 fights at this point. That adds up, and then you get some wars on the end of that. I mean, yeah, you're not necessarily going to be that same person. But I think I lean more towards what the champ Paulie was saying. they more made a decision not to have a war together. Sometimes in fights, you get kind of silent agreements with your opponent. It seemed like they both kind of agreed that, like, you know what, we're going to go tactical tonight. We don't need to go rock'em sock'em robots again. We already did that twice. They've seen enough of that. Let's go out here. Let's not necessarily play nice, but let's box each other tonight. We're both making a ton of money either way, so let's do it together.
I will say though that, you know, the adjustments Serrano made, I thought were smart. You have to make those subtle adjustments, but I think she went away a little bit from what her identity is. You make adjustments, but you don't lose your identity, and that's the key denominator there. So when it comes to Serrano, I thought there were technical adjustments she needed to make, and I thought she made them. I thought she, you know, she wasn't crossing her feet when she was coming forward. She was coming forward like, you know, sort of scurrying her feet instead of crossing them. She was cutting off the ring well in larger spots. She could do that a little bit better, but hey, man, I mean, going from not cutting it off at all to doing this, I thought was a lot of progress. But then aside from that, she didn't attack as much when she got in range. You know, she still gave that respect for Taylor to give that in and out movement, you know? So she did adjust, but then she didn't fulfill her end of the bargain, which is her identity. And that's, you know, when you make those adjustments to put you in those positions, you have to pounce like a tiger that you are, you know? And that's where, you know, the champs, acknowledgement of maybe they're a little bit over the hill, and maybe, you know, they didn't want to wind up in the hospital at night after kept picking up a last check. Maybe they, you know, it was sort of that agreement, but it allows Taylor to be able to box just enough to get the decision here, man. You know, and that's, you know, because Taylor will want to box this kind of fight. As a matter of fact, if you're Taylor, you're probably thankful that Serrano is not coming at you full force. As a matter of fact, anytime Serrano was able to cut off the ring, I thought she had the advantage. It's just in the moments, and especially the last round, it was glaring. All of a sudden, she stopped cutting off the ring completely in the last round. And anytime Taylor was able to circle the ring, you could see a distinct advantage for Taylor because she had her way as far as her options to be able to circle and change range. When she was being cut off, she couldn't circle the ring. She could only change range, and that range would end up being less and less because Serrano would start to cut it off and then get closer and closer. So I thought a big difference was Serrano cutting the ring off in the spots where she had success, and Serrano not cutting off the ring when she didn't have success. But even when she cut off the ring, I thought she could have been put a little more emphasis with engaging physically. And maybe she was, who knows, maybe on Serrano's part, maybe she was hesitant because of the headbutts. There were a couple of headbutts tonight, nothing got cut, but maybe that's why Serrano also wasn't as aggressive in that manner, you know? I thought it was a good technical fight, but I think that's what you got to call it. And for me, I can appreciate that. I don't know that it was the way they were trying to sell it on Netflix, though. They were making like it was the first two fights. But guys, I will say one thing about the guys who are, you know, they can't, you can't be a sadist, and the second and third fights can't be the same. 100% agree. Two guys.
Gotti Ward.
Gotti Ward. I was going to tell you, Gotti Ward. There was a knockdown in every fight. They went at it in every fight. You know, I guess we're all sadists in some ways because we love that. We love it.
They ended up in the hospital after every fight.
Yeah, but none of them were as violent as the first one. You know what I mean? Like nothing got that.
Again, you're right. You're right. There were knockdowns in every fight. There were. It was every single one of those fights out of knockdown.
But also that they weren't really evenly matched if you really look at it. Arturo was a much higher level boxer than Mickey, and we saw that in fights 2 and 3. And 2, I mean, Gotti, he ran away with it. He dropped, you know, Ward early. He broke his hand bad, but you know, he ran away with it the second fight. The third fight, he was on his way to really running away with it, maybe even getting a stoppage, and he breaks his hand again. And then it became a fight. He gets dropped, and it became a thrilling fight. But no, the first one was by and away the most brutal of the 3. But they were different because again, tactically and skill wise, they were on different levels. These two are very very skilled and very matched up very well.
Was there a little bit, Chris? I'll ask you about this. Was there a little bit of the, you know, what I saw was maybe, you know, Hagler Leonard, where Leonard would flurry at the end of rounds and throw these nice, like, sweet looking punches. It didn't do a ton of damage. He would kind of flurry at the right time to win rounds. Did you see Taylor doing that a little bit in this fight? When she was cornered, it was like, bang, these blitzes, you know?
Yeah, well, Taylor's to Champ's point earlier, that's Taylor's style. That's how she fights. And we talked about it on the pre-show too, leading up to this fight, talking about how Katie's just really good at finding that little extra punch to win the round, to get the nod in that direction. And a lot of that comes from the amateur experience. You know, you're fighting super high level ladies, and it's literally you're splitting hairs to decide who's going to win or not. And Katie, more often than not, did win, and she got into a gold medal. So I think in this style of matchup and the way that they chose to fight this fight, Katie Taylor's going to win every time. It's her kind of fight. Serrano needed to make this a brawl. She needed to get her to trade with her. She had to get her power in there. But that never really happened. She didn't really step on the gas when she needed to, like you said, Jan. And Katie fought very, very smart. She was in and out. She was using that amateur style, those coming back with the jabs. I thought the corners did a great job from both teams. We're giving really, really good advice. The ladies were listening too. But again, it was not the same barn burner that we saw in the first two fights. Again, I agree with the Chan. It was an enjoyable fight. It was tactical for sure. And you had to really watch this fight. It wasn't just like, okay, rock'em sock'em robots.
Well, when you look at it, Paulie, I mean, this whole card, does it show either the promotional muscle of Jake Paul, meaning the crowd was into it, it was a good card, and, women's boxing, the level of all the top ladies is starting to come up a bit. Very entertaining co-main event, very entertaining main event. What do you think about it for entertainment value?
I thought it was a solid card. I thought it was sort of a Super Bowl for women's boxing, the biggest card I think in the history of women's boxing, because you also had they showed Netflix showing the star-studded celebrity cast that it was also out coming to the fight. It was like a big Vegas fight in NMSG with the celebs in the crowd and sort of a VIP commentating team as well, and a lot of glamour about it, and also, it had the substance because of the rivalry that they were putting out there. It wasn't like you just put this card together and you're trying to sell it. There was substance behind it as well. Now, as far as the whole card, did it live up to the expectation? I don't think it needs to live up to anything, really. I think as long as it's not a dud, which it wasn't, I think it's fine because the representation of these women have already speaks for themselves. You had a lot of very good fighters on the card, and the substance was there, and they've proven themselves. So at that point, you judge it. I try to judge it like I would judge a guy's card, and you take the pros and the cons of it. I thought it was a solid card. You're not going to get Gotti Ward every single time. You're not going to get these kind of wars every single time, but you're also not going to get a dud every single time too. So I think it was a solid card, and I think it by and far lived up to proper expectations. I think sometimes on TV there is a little bit of a guilt where they have to make like women's boxing is better than it is. It's certainly raising its levels, though. It's certainly raising its levels, and I rate. For a long time, for me, there was a lot of women's champions that just because they were champions doesn't mean they can fight. I look at them and I'm like, I don't think that girl's very good, even though they're champions. And for me, it was just it was really the low level of boxing. Now, today in 2025, I see a lot of levels where I look at women's world champions and even women's contenders, and I'll be like, oh, pretty solid. I want to see this matchup because it's solid versus solid instead of maybe one solid and one you're just trying to sell it to us or whatever. You're getting there to the point where
parity.
Yeah,
you're starting to get some parity.
You're getting there. Also, there's depth to the talent as well. There's more depth to the talent. So you don't have to sell me you don't have to sell me something. You don't have to I didn't think Netflix needed to sell this tonight. I thought it was a solid card. I didn't think Netflix needed to sell it to us like it was one of the first two fights in the main event. Like I don't know why the whole you have to try harder than you need to. I thought it was a solid card. There's nothing to overhype about it. It was a solid card. It was a good card. Don't sell me like it was one of the part 1 and 2. Like, oh, this fight is what are you talking about, dude? This is a completely different fight from the first two fights. Just say it how it is and talk to me about the beauty of that tactical boxing. Because for me as a boxer, I know for the casual maybe they don't appreciate. For me as a boxer, I can appreciate the beauty of that tactical boxing. Stop selling me what it's not, because you don't need to try so hard. I thought it was a solid card. It was a good card top to bottom, and you had some good fighters there. And like I said, I like the glamour around it as well, because that's how you build it more. You make even casuals be like, oh, this is a big event. I want to take part in it next time. I want to go see it next time. You can do this again. Just don't tell me what it's not. Because what it is, it's fine. If you tell me what it is, it's fine already.
Well, Chris, I want to throw that question to you a little bit, because I know the play-by-play guy, Sean Grandy. I worked with him at Bellator. He's absolutely fantastic. Andre Ward was your color. I thought the broadcast was very, very good. Sean Wheelock, of course, friend of mine,
VIP
broadcaster as well. Yeah. But this idea, Chris, let me ask you, when I do ProBox TV, and I'm going to pull back the curtain just a little bit, I'm a play-by-play guy. Most of our audience is pretty hardcore. Right. Mm-hmm. If you're watching I know the audience. I don't try to dumb things down for the audience, because I assume you're a pretty hardcore fan to be watching us. If you're doing Netflix, or you're doing, kind of as Paulie said, a crossover thing, I know in play-by-play, I tend to talk to as Paulie says, I tend to talk to a more casual audience in a different way. Did they do that too much to you tonight, Chris? Because I thought it was pretty good, but they were talking to a lot of non-boxing fans.
Yeah, no, I think they did do a good job, and there was that idea, and you could tell that I think that was part of the way that they were broadcasting. Because Andre Ward, he can get very highbrow, obviously. I mean,
Yes, yes.
he is who he is. But he's a very analytical eye, and he will often explain things in a way that it's really for hardcores. But he didn't do that tonight, and I think he knew that the audience that he had in front of him. You got to know your audience. So I think that was probably something that was talked about in the production leading up to this event. Understanding that, listen, you can't be out there throwing hardcore inside boxing knowledge because it's just going to go over people's heads. So I think they did do a good job like that in Champ. I like that term that you said is like VIP style of event and broadcasting. But in terms of the event and the card, I agree with you, Champ. The card was good, but I think we can go back to mixing now. We can have men and women fighting in the same cards. We don't need to have an entire card of just women. We don't need to have an entire card of just men. There was no reason that we can't make a solid card with solid female fights and solid male fighters. This card, I mean, was really good in terms of the matchups. I put those ladies, put those matchups on any given card where it's mostly male dominated card. They'll fit in just fine because this was very highbrow, very high level female boxing. But I'm just saying, let's go back to mixing the cards. You don't have to have full lady female cards.
One of the things you've said, Paulie, and I'm very curious about this, is just when they start to separate one another, the round ends, right? That you've said this before, Paulie, that as the level gets higher, that third minute a lot of times separates the men from the boys, literally, in men's boxing. This idea that yeah. So what's your thought? Because there were a couple of times when man, if there were another minute here, Katie Taylor would maybe start taking over the round, and then boom, it would end. Was there an argument because of a card like this where you're seeing the parity for the third minute? What's your thought?
It's so difficult to judge because it's like, I don't know what to say. Like sometimes I'm like, Mom, but they're women. Like they take that kind of damage. Can their bodies are not designed like men to take that kind of damage. What happens if you start making this consistently 3-minute rounds? But then I'll watch these kind of fights and you're just like, all right, dude, Taylor Serrano has to be 3 minutes. Like I can't figure this out anymore. Like they're both so parodied up that I just need the extra minute at this point. Give me an extra minute in half the rounds at least. Maybe not in all the rounds. Give me an extra round or something. I don't know. I need something to separate these two because it's so evenly matched every single time. I mean, I know Taylor got all the decisions, but it's like, dude, every single time you're finding yourself wondering when the bell rings, who's gonna get it? I can't figure it out. Right. And it's like, all right, I just don't know myself. I'm open to interpretation and ideas, and even in the comment section, but I don't know what to do to separate that kind of fight. Like for the most part, I'm almost not against women having 2-minute rounds because again, I think physically they're not made to take as much punishment as guys in that sense. And so I worry for people on a human level, but man, then you get this kind of fight, you're like, oh, I'm pulling my hair out. I can't take it. I can't figure it out anymore, but I don't know the solution. I don't know I don't know what's the give and take to give, because then are you eliminating, are you throwing caution to the wind and eliminating health and safety standards, for my entertainment, for my need to definitely know who's going to win fights, because maybe between these two, you need the extra minute, you need that, but maybe it ends up in a different fight. Somebody loses their life because of that. I mean? I don't know. I don't know what the give and pull is. But it's frustrating on a night like this. It's frustrating.
Well, we have a show tomorrow, but before we go, Chris, I'm going to ask you the final question. Is there frustration here? I was thinking about trilogies or even more, rivalries and one a little longer, where you could never really separate the two. And the only one I could come up with was honestly our own Juan Manuel Marquez, Manny Pacquiao. If you're a Pacquiao fan, he kind of won because he beat him more times. If you're a Marquez fan, he face planted him in the last fight. He was decisively better. That's the only rivalry I can really think of where you couldn't really separate the two. Every other rivalry, I mean, one person won two, the other one didn't, so we know who won. Is it kind of frustrating that each one was so close it could have gone either way? Is it a little frustrating, or do you like that, Chris?
Yeah, especially since Taylor got them all. I mean, it was really, really close fight. Two women who were so evenly matched, but Taylor ended up getting them all. And like on paper, you're going to look at this like, wow, Taylor went 3-0. Is this really a great trilogy? But yeah, if you look, you got to look beyond the numbers and actually watch the fights. They were so evenly matched each and every round up until even this fight. I thought, I thought Katie deserved the win tonight. I thought the first fight was a draw. I thought Serrano won the second one, and I thought tonight Katie won the fight. So, but there's a lot of different ways you can interpret it. But at the end of the day, Katie got them all.
Champ, your standard, you need a fourth fight because it's even right now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to me,
it's
so evenly matched. But again, she's 3-0 now. You gonna have another fight and possibly go 4-0.
I was saying tonight, if Taylor won, if Serrano won, you need a fourth fight. I was of that opinion.
Yes,
but now, because it's so freaking close again, I'm gonna say this.
You still could
I'm gonna say. You need a fourth fight, but it has to be 12 rounds. It has to be 13 rounds. It has to be something out of the box. I can't do another one like this where it's 10-2s and I can't figure out at the end because I'm done with 10-2s and I can't figure out between these two girls specifically. I'm done with the 10-2s that I can't figure out who won every time. But if I am actually not against a fourth fight between these two, but it's gotta come something outside the box has to be figured out. You gotta separate them. Now it's too much.
Hey, Amanda wanted the 3 minutes. Amanda wanted the 3 minutes. She said there was a handshake agreement between the two of them that there wasn't.
Do 2s and go 12. That's my
12 2s.
Okay. We can do 12 2s. I think they can agree to that because there has to be something to separate these ladies because once again, so incredibly close. But Vladimir Hernandez, Francisco Veron is a main event we're looking forward to tomorrow. Save Mart Center, Fresno, California. So we can get our sleep tonight. Appreciate all of you on ProBox TV watching us post, of course, fight as always for the champs. Chris Algieri, Paulie Malignaggi. I'm Jimmy Smith. We'll see you tomorrow night right here on ProBox TV.